Hello, and welcome to the podcast, Justice Unbound, about women, religion, and the state of Israel. In this podcast, we take you behind the closed doors of Israeli rabbinic courts, where all hearings are held in camera, closed to the public, and where the state applies religious laws to decide the fate of women trapped in marital captivity, agonot, of children stigmatized because of their mother's sexual partners, mamzerim, of converts who do not keep the Sabbath, and where citizens are cross-examined about whether they are Jewish enough, and much, much more. Justice Unbound is written and produced by the Center for Women's Justice, CWJ. I am your host, Susan Weiss, a divorce lawyer with a PhD in sociology and anthropology, and the founder of the Center for Women's Justice.
And I'm your host, Rivkah, a religious feminist who has represented many women in Israeli rabbinic courts, acting as a rabbinic court pleader, a to'enet rabbanit. Today, we get to tell the story of the killer wife.
Rivkah, I've heard of a killer whale, but a killer wife? A wife who murdered her husband?
No, not exactly, but kind of, yes. It's about a woman who was married to two men who died and wants to marry a third one.
She murdered her first two husbands, and now she wants to marry a third one?
No, not exactly, but kind of, yes. No, she did not murder her first two husbands. She's not a murderer or a killer of any sort. Her husbands just died. Whether they were sick or died of old age, it doesn't matter how they died. But many halachic sources claim that a man must not marry a woman whose first two husbands died. So even though she didn't actually kill her husbands, Jewish sources refer to her literally as a killer wife, isha katlanit, implying that she had something to do with their deaths. So no, theoretically she did not kill her husbands, but yes, the halakha thinks that she had something to do with it, hence the term killer wife.
Hold it. Are you telling me that the Israeli state, the state of Israel, adopts the rule of the killer wife with regard to Jewish couples since it applies halakha to all matters of marriage and divorce?
Yes, I hate to say it, yes. This is a rule that the state of Israel enforces. In any event, today we will be describing the case of such a killer wife. What we hope to illustrate is the kind of reasoning that underlies decisions of rabbinic courts. Spoiler alert, the court permitted the killer wife to marry.
In this particular case, the killer wife was not one of our clients. We did not represent her. We know about her and how the court decided her case from a 10-page decision written in 2014 by a rabbinic judge sitting in Beersheba named Rabbi Tzion Luz Iluz. The rabbinic court administration sent this case for publication to the legal website called Nevo. It is readily available to the public. This is an important fact. Not all rabbinic court cases are published. In fact, very few are. Some are made available by the rabbinic courts. This one, the rabbinic courts specifically decided to publish. Stay with us till the end and you'll find out why.
Okay, back to the killer wife. But before we dive into the decision, let's just remind our listeners that there is no civil marriage or divorce in Israel. If a Jewish person wants to marry, they need to go to a religious cleric, who is a marriage registrar, who will make an initial determination whether they can marry according to halakha. If the registrar determines that there may be a problem, he will send them to rabbinic court, where the rabbinic judges will decide the matter. And that's how we get our case. A woman went for permission to marry and found out that she was suspected of being a killer wife. And then the marriage registrar sent her to the rabbinic courts to have it be decided if her man is allowed to marry her.
Rivkah, what are the origins of this law? Where did it come from, and what is the logic behind it?
Okay, so the law has its origins in the Gemara of Yevamot. It does not appear in more ancient sources like the Bible or even in the Mishnah. As we already explained, a killer wife is a woman whose first two husbands have died, and she wants to marry a third one. On the face of things, she is obviously a woman who deserves to be treated with compassion, or at least to be treated with the understanding that life has not been easy for her. But instead, Jewish law actually seems to blame her for her husband's death. This is terrible and very upsetting.
Does the Gemara explain the logic behind this rule?
Yes, it gives two reasons. Both have their origins in mystical or magical thinking. The first reason places blame on the well, which is a euphemism for a woman's sexual organ. The Gemara assumes that having sexual relations with such a woman can cause the death of her husband. The other reason places the blame on fate, or the stars, which have somehow afflicted the killer wife. Professor Avram Grossman, a historian of medieval Jewry who taught at the Hebrew University and wrote a famous book called Chasidot Umordot, Pious and Rebellious, Jewish Women in Europe in the Middle Ages, wrote a lot about killer wives. We will attach a link to this important book in the notes. Anyway, Grossman refers to the mystical notion from the Zohar that suggests that the spirits of the dead husbands attach themselves to the killer wife. Gets more and more exciting, Susan. Any man who marries her will have to conduct a war with those jealous spirits.
That's interesting. Is there such a thing as a killer husband?
No, there's no such assumption with regard to men. Men can bury and marry women freely, as many as they want, without hesitation or restraint.
No woman is going to come and haunt them, huh?
Right.
And so let's get back to our story. What exactly did the rabbis tell the killer wife when she asked for permission to marry?
The rabbinic judge, Rabbi Tzion Luz Iluz, did give her permission to marry, but wrote no less than 10 pages explaining himself. He gave 4 reasons why the woman was not really a killer wife.
Oh, so is this a good ruling or a bad one?
Well, let's see what you think after you hear how he reached his decision. So here are the 4 reasons that caused the rabbi to come to the conclusion that the woman was not a killer wife. First, the rabbinic judge, the Dayan, who wrote the decision, noted that the wife's second husband died at the age of 90. So, writes the Dayan, it would appear that it was not fate, stars, or bad luck attached to the wife that killed him, but instead old age. I actually have to cite this from his psak din. He says, בנידון דדן שמת בן 90, נראה לעניות דעתי שהכל יודו שיש לתלות המיטה בזקנתו ולא במזל האישה. In this case, he says, when he died at the age of 90, everyone will agree that we can assume it was from old age and not the woman's luck.
Great. So it appears that he might have died because of his age, not because of his wife.
Exactly. But then the Dayan continues to wonder at what age a man has to die in order for his wife not to be considered a killer. He decides that 60 is the cutoff.
Voila. So that means that if a man dies under the age of 60, the halakha assumes that his wife somehow contributed to his death.
Correct.
Okay, let's hear the next reason.
The next reason is that both husbands lived with the wife for more than 15 years. In fact, the second husband lived with her for more than 23 years. If the woman was bad luck, the husbands would not have lasted 15 years. They would have died earlier. The Dayan then establishes a 6-year cutoff point. If a man dies within 6 years of a marriage, then it can be assumed again that it's his wife's spirit or bad luck that had something to do with it. If the husband and wife live together for more than 6 years, then it can be presumed that the wife is not a killer.
Okay, Rivkah. And what if they married when the husband was 56 and he died 5 years later when he was 61? In other words, the husband died after the age of 60, but within 5 years of their marriage. Does one rule contradict the other?
Okay, Susan, that's too confusing. I'm not even going to try to answer that question. Let's go on to the third reason. The third reason is because the first husband died when the couple was living in the diaspora, and the second husband died after the couple immigrated to Israel. So in short, the Dayan explains, the stars or the luck can change from place to place. He quotes the well-known Hebrew saying, Mishaneh makom, mishaneh mazal.
But Rivkah, that is not a halakha, a Jewish rule of any sort. It's just a saying, which means, if I am permitted to paraphrase it, try your luck somewhere else, since the stars change from place to place.
Well, Rabbi Luz Iluz thinks it is the halakha. Don't ask me. I didn't write the decision. Luz Iluz explains that the stars change from place to place, especially when someone moves to Israel. So when someone comes on Aliyah, immigrates to Israel, we start counting dead husbands from the beginning.
Okay, that makes sense. Not. And the fourth reason?
Okay, the fourth reason, this is the one I like best. The fourth reason is because the wife and all of her husbands were not religious, and they did not keep the commandments, in particular the laws of marital purity. That means that the woman did not go to the mikveh, so the couple slept with each other when the wife was halachically impure.
So the killer wife rule does not apply to them? It doesn't apply to secular couples?
Right. The husband probably died because he did not observe the commandments, in particular the one that prohibits sex with a woman who has not gone to the mikveh to purify herself after her period. In other words, according to the Dayan, the man died because he sins, not because of his killer wife.
Rivkah, why do you think the Dayan simply didn't say that the killer wife rule has its origins in ancient false beliefs about ghosts and spirits? Wouldn't that have made things much easier and the decision much clearer?
Yes, I would have imagined so. In fact, the Rambam made such a decision already in the Middle Ages. He didn't believe in all of this. But other rabbis at the time disagreed with him, even stating that if a man wanted to take his chances and marry a killer wife, he should not be allowed to marry since suicide is prohibited. The prohibition against marrying a killer wife was accepted by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch in the 16th century, as well as by his Ashkenazi counterpart, Rabbi Moshe Isserlich, the Ramah from Poland.
Let's back up for a minute. I want to understand which Jewish laws apply to rabbinic courts in Israel. Are Israeli rabbis from the 21st century in Israel quoting decisions from the 16th century Poland, from the Ottoman Empire? Aren't such decisions bereft of all context, time, and place?
The answer is yes. Rabbinic judges in Israel base their decisions on any ruling from anywhere and any time. In fact, in the 10-page decision we are discussing, the Dayan quotes numerous rabbis, the Tashbetz from 14th century Algeria, the Rimi Gash, 10th century Spain, the Bash, 16th century Lublin, among others. We need to discuss this phenomena at length, but not today.
Okay, but what do you think about the bottom line? Wouldn't some of our friends and colleagues think that this is a great decision? After all, the bottom line is that the Dayan declares that the poor elderly woman can get married.
Oh, yes. I'm very happy for this particular woman, for sure. But the decision, in my mind, is outrageous. First, because it has real consequences. The decision confirms the idea that there is such a thing as a killer wife. I know real men who refuse to date real women because of this stigma. And I know personally women who have been hurt by this rule and never remarried. Second, this is a bit more abstract, but it has real consequences too. Think about the image of women that the rule of the killer wife constructs. Women are no longer just people like men. They are beings whose sexuality is dangerous and who attract demons and evil spirits. Such women have to be closely controlled and followed so as not to endanger men.
Yes, and it is likely that this conception of women as dangerous sexual beings informs lots of the decisions of the rabbis, including the ones that most occupy us, like the problem of women anchored to their husbands until they agree to let them loose, the aguna, and the problem of the mamzer, a child born to wanton women whose sexuality was unrestrained, and more.
And let's not forget the most important point, which you, Susan, are always reminding us of. The killer wife has now become the law of the land. It is an official rule of the state. The Dayan writes in his decision that the Beit Din and anyone entrusted with the marriage arrangements should avoid cooperating with any man wanting to marry a killer wife. The rule of killer woman, he says, is not the same as rules about who can marry whom. This is about a real threat of danger to the man's life, and the Beit Din should not allow this to happen. So now the killer wife rule has been revived, even though not all rabbis in the past agreed on it, and not everyone sees it even today as a clear prohibition. In fact, I've spoken to quite a few rabbis in the U.S. who told me that they relate to the killer wife rule as a custom that no longer applies. But now, thanks to this Rabbi Luz Iluz and his decision, this rule has the status of an absolute prohibition. And because the state of Israel has given the rabbis a monopoly on marriage and divorce, this rule becomes, as we said before, the law of the land.
Wow, Rivkah, what a decision. It is so interesting from an anthropological and sociological perspective, but so horrifying to think that we actually have to live by this decision. So what actually happened, Rivkah, is that while Rabbi Luz Iluz saved this particular woman, he ossified, fossilized, and reified, a very bad rule, to say the least.
Yes. We are nearing completion, and I must admit that this is a very difficult episode for me. Makes me angry, embarrassed, and raises so many questions about my religion and my country. I read the ruling over and over again and refuse to believe that this is the reality of Jewish law in the courts of Israel today, and that it is a reality that a democratic and enlightened state permits. Susan, do you think this will ever change?
Rivkah, it has to. Eventually, it is simply not sustainable. So, on that more optimistic note, I think we'll wrap up for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, Justice Unbound, Women, Religion, and the State of Israel, produced by the Center for Women's Justice. We would love to hear your comments and thoughts. Please reach out to us on social media or on our website page.
This podcast was produced thanks to the generous support of the Gimprich Family Foundation. Thank you, Rachel Stomel, for all your help. I am Rivkah Lubitsch.
And I am Susan Weiss. Thank you for listening.